And in this lesson, what I want to do is kind of go back to some of the basics about the different things that you can do on a SharePoint site that are really going to give you the most value for using SharePoint. So again, a lot of time what I spend doing with different organizations is helping them get the most out of SharePoint and actually helping them use SharePoint so that it doesn't end up being this very expensive thing that I've purchased, that I've implemented, that I've spent a great deal of time getting up and going, and now no one's using it. And so a lot of the things that I find that keep people from using it are very simple things that can be addressed with some of the stuff that is just done out of the box. And so I like to, in a lot of my sessions, always go back to those basics and keep harping in those things so that people can really get the idea of, okay, well, let's just start simple and keep building upon these different things. So my contact information is there again. You guys, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm kind of everywhere. For the agenda for this session, we're going to talk about making the most out of the out-of-the-box design features. Talk about pages, and we're going to talk about web parts. So this is going back to the basics of all basics, but it's cool and I like it, and they let me do a session, so I totally get to talk about it. So for our solution, we had the form, Visio services, automation, and the site design. The site design, even though it's number 4 on this, is usually something that happens in step number 1 for me. But when I'm going through and I'm trying to teach people how to do different things, I usually do it at the end because otherwise they're so caught up with, I need to build a form, I need to do all those things, which are all of the things that they need to do, but there's all of these other components as well. So this is kind of that final, nice little wrapping paper. We're putting the bow on it to present the solution to everyone. So in this one, we're going to talk about the site design. And we just want to build an inviting user experience with no code. So again, I define code as does not require syntax and does not require semicolons. I know the rest of the world doesn't always describe it that way. So you'll hear some different people talking about things they can do with JavaScript and different things along those lines. You can do all of those with SharePoint, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with them. They're good solutions. I just don't necessarily consider them no-code solutions because I have to pay attention to semicolons, and that seems like more work than what I want. So my goal is to help us do more with less. So go back to the very basics inside of SharePoint and get things out of our solution. So we have our solution here. A couple of things that I want to start out with, the very basics of all things, is that when I design a site out for people, I spend a lot of time just doing simple formatting. So if we take my page and put it in edit mode, you will see that I have a collection of web parts on the page. You guys are used to working with web parts, I'm assuming, inside of a SharePoint site. And you know that web parts have the Chrome. So this right here is your Chrome. And you can say whether my Chrome is going to display my title, title bar only, different things like that. Are you guys all familiar with that? 99% of the time, I hide the Chrome and put in my own text for the title. And you see I did that here. This says in progress expense reports, and this says in progress expense reports. But when you look at it, which one visually calls out to the eye more than the other? It's the one I did. I come in and I write my text, and I take full advantage of this list of markup styles. I pick a collection of styles that's going to work for my solution, and I reuse them everywhere. And what that's going to do is make it visually appealing and consistent. So let's just say I was going into the site, and it was normal text. This is probably what you guys are used to seeing when we come over here with normal. You just have text on a site. So I just start typing, there we go, I can get whatever I want. Okay. What I will do is know, okay, this is a header that I want to use, so I'll come over to my markup styles, and I will let it do all of the styling for me. But then I use that same style across all of my headers to make it consistent. The other one that I use all of the time is the horizontal rule, so that it visually puts a line in there for people to use it. Now, this is stuff that is extremely cheesy, but has a very powerful effect. Because when you hide the Chrome from all of the other web parts and you put that there, you are able to very visually give them something to look at. So now when we save and close the page, I can go directly to the different section and my eyes will do this. I do this on almost every page that I do. So on the approval dashboard, you will see the same concept. I've picked a similar feel for things to look at, and I've used the horizontal rule to try to get their eyes to visually do it. And in this one, I've even added images. So I can see, oh, there's little notes here. I have a little Post-it note. Here's my expense reports. I have a little credit card. Here's a chart. I'm going to view historical data. And so I try to, wherever I can, visually map something out that's easy for them to see. But I do all of this just using the standard things that are there. So because I'm not on a wiki page here, I don't have the ability to do free text. So what I do then instead is insert a content editor web part, and then I can put my text inside of that. So this is one of those things that I will take the extra time on every page that I have to do this, because it usually is the difference between someone feeling comfortable when they first get to a page or wandering around looking for what things are. I don't know what it is about the web part Chrome, but it's like it's invisible to users. It's like they can't see it and they don't know what to do with it. So I try to, as much as I can, hide those additional pieces of information that they don't need. So here I have a list. If this is not a list that I want them to add data to, I'll hide the toolbar. So I spend a lot of time formatting different things to make it as visually appealing as possible. And one of the great things that they've done inside of SharePoint 2010 is the ability to do images. So when I can come over here, wherever I put, like if I was to add a new web part here, I'm going to call this content. So we're going to go get our content editor web part. When I put this in here, I can simply click here and start adding text. And I can do things over here like inserting a picture. And when I insert a picture from my computer, it's going to let me browse out to my computer, find a picture. I can take whichever picture that I want, insert it, and it's going to upload it to a library for me. So any users that have the ability to edit a page, if they put an image on a page, they're going to put an image in a location where everyone can access it. So if you guys used 2007 and you tried to do something like this, what always happened is users would point to something on their local machine and then everyone else would get a red X. I think that might be the #1 help desk question I got in 2007. How come it shows a red X? Okay. So they have fixed that so it doesn't happen. So I can actually update the picture here. But then in addition to updating the picture, I have all of these design elements that I can do. So I can come over here and I can set certain sizes on it, but I can also come over here and do things with a border. So I can say, oh, well, let's make it a thin border, a table border, dark border, light border. So I can do these different things. And what I have found is as long as I'm consistent, users get a very rich experience. So usually I pick a couple of icons, I decide how I want to do it, and I get very consistent throughout the page. And then the users are all of a sudden much more happier with how the page is laid out. It's all about, in most cases, getting them to feel comfortable enough on the page to interact with it. If they're not comfortable with the content on the page and it's not very clear to them, they're going to feel as if I can't touch this, I don't want to break it, I don't want to come near it. And so what I have found is the more you can graphically draw them to the page, the better they happen to feel about the page and the more that they happen to use it. Now, I am a nerd at heart, and I think going to all of this trouble to put images on a page is kind of silly. So I'm in the same camp as you guys in saying that, come on, really, like you can't read it and just do it. But for whatever reason, it really does make a difference. And so I started to do this kind of on accident one day, and it was more that I was just playing with some of the things that you could do inside of SharePoint and going with it. And as I was looking at one of the sites, one of the executives that I was working on came over and looked at my screen and they're like, wow, that looks really good. And I'm like, what? I'm just writing an article about the different styles you can do. So then I incorporated it into their solution, and then the next thing I know, everyone's incorporating it to their solutions over and over there. And I was like, all right, you guys really like this. So then I went to another company and just did the same thing, and I could show them two different things. One of them was stylized headers and one of them was not, and they adapted to the one with stylized headers first because they could visually see it, and it felt easier to work with. So since then, I have become the icon queen, and I use them everywhere. I get them all from, this is my favorite site, well, for this, Microsoft.com/Office. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but if you come over here to Office and you go to Images, you can search on whatever you'd like. My trick is to go to, that's a really scary puppy. My trick is to go to Icon, and then I usually go PNG because the PNG file type tends to get rid of all of the cheesiness. But if I do something like Icon PNG, I'm going to just have hundreds of different stylized icons that I can use. So I just save these, build a collection, and the beauty of using them from here is they're all relatively the same size. So I usually pick a size that's going to match for it, memorize what that size is, and then set all of the images to match to be the same one. So I spend a lot of time getting them from, I don't know, does anybody have a cell phone that still looks like that? That one's a little bit dated. But different things like that. Some of them are horribly cheesy and you'd never use them. Bag of groceries, I've never really used bag of groceries. But you know, different things along those lines. And then when you click on them, you can even say view details. And then there's one spot where you can say show me, see similar images. And then it will actually pull up a collage of all of the images. So you really could get a whole icon collection there. So one of the little tricks that I do to build things and to build them out there. So one of the main things that I do is look at how am I going to add these visual elements to the site to help people get to things as quick as they can. So there's a couple of different ways. We've got navigation across the top, but then you've also got the quick launch. So we've got things in the quick launch, we've got navigation across the top, and then we've got stuff in the middle of the page. So what I like to do is keep it down to a minimum. I want to put things across the top that are always going to be across the top that will take people to landing pages. On the quick launch, sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't use it. I try to be a little bit consistent throughout the site. It's usually there on the home page. For the rest of my dashboard pages, I make a decision call if I want to use it or not, but I try to at least be consistent with it. And I try to always teach people how to get back to the home page so that they could drill down through here. So for our site here, we just have expense report, or expense request, approval dashboards. We have solution creation. This has nothing to do with the solution. This was the really cool thing I was trying to do for you guys today with the internet, so you guys could actually log through, go to all of the different sessions, and see a page that had all of the different decks. Some of them actually have the decks plus links to different things, but you guys can also have access to this. And then about was, again, just to give you guys details about the actual solution so that you could go and do it. So I tend to do these on my demo environments. The rest of it, I keep things pretty simple and consistent so they have this concept of dashboarding. So I want to talk about the concept of dashboarding for a bit because that is the wrong one. Sorry. Dashboarding is one of those big buzzwords that everybody likes. Everyone wants a dashboard. But a dashboard really can mean anything to anyone. And so I like to really define a dashboard as this concept of data plus context leading users to action. So I want to give them whatever data they need in the right context and then give them an action that they have to take on that. If I can show users, here is all the data that you need. Here's the context that it would be appropriate in, and here's the action I want you to take. If every SharePoint solution is that clear to them, it's going to get very easy to use. If my SharePoint solutions aren't that clear, 90% of the time it has to do with the people because they don't have a good process and they don't have something clearly defined. So there's a lot that has to change in a culture for you to be able to get very good SharePoint requirements to build them. But if you can start thinking around, okay, I have data. What is the data? What does the data mean? What value do I have to give them? What other properties do I have to show them? What context can I give them about it? So in our examples today, the context that we gave them is where is it at in a process? So I have a Visio diagram that's giving them the context of where the data is. Instead of giving them a list where I'm grouping it, it's the same context, but I'm grouping it by there. I'm giving them context through a Visio diagram, which they can see quickly, click on it, and get to the data. Then I want to cause them to take an action. And so this is how I like to think about building dashboards. Dashboards can be as easy as they need to be, and they can be so complex that you can't even stand it. So a lot of times people will see dashboards and you think of BI, all of the BI tools. You have got Performance Point, you have got SQL reporting services, you've got performance, I said Performance Point already, but you've got all of these different crazy dashboards. I'm connecting to external data connections and I have all of this data and I'm doing reporting. Well, that's one type of dashboarding because it gives users data and context, but not everything has to be that complex. And so there's a time and a place for everything, but the most important thing to consider is the user. What do they need, and then what's the best tool to create what they need? But the idea is that if they just need a collection of documents, we can show them something like that. We can make it as easy as it needs to be or as complex as it needs to be. But in every solution that we're doing, even if we're not using some of those advanced tools like the BI tool stack and stuff like that, we should still be thinking of how am I dashboarding this information to give users data plus context to lead them to action. Okay. So our dashboard primarily that we were building was a review meeting dashboard. So they could go in, they could see with Visio, then they could go get additional information and look at the different pieces. We also have a historical data dashboard, and this is one that's just pulling from Excel services and showing data up there so they can quickly go and access it. So a couple of different dashboarding techniques that you can do there. I've kind of adapted to the camp of I'll just call anything a dashboard as long as I'm giving data to users and trying to get them to do something. And I just now call it all dashboards because my users call it all dashboards. Now, if we stepped over into the developer track, I'd probably get my hand slapped for calling them dashboards because it's not really a dashboard unless it's truly a dashboard, but we'll just agree to call it whatever people understand. But the whole concept inside of SharePoint is done by putting them on pages. So pages inside of SharePoint gives you real estate. So I have real estate so I can present data to users. The data that I'm typically presenting to users is stuff that's stored inside of SharePoint lists and libraries. Now, if we're going back to the most simple concepts, it's the stuff that is stored inside of lists and libraries. So what we want to do is create this real estate so that we can put our data on it. When you go into SharePoint, you can say create a new page. But I want to show you guys something. When you click on more options, see if any of you guys have run into this yet, is a page, a page, a page. There's 3 different types of pages inside of SharePoint. You have the publishing page, which is, it's not even showing up here because I'm not on a publishing site, but it's a page that comes up for like intranet-facing or internet-facing sites that is built on a page layout that has different zones that you can drop data in. That is a publishing page. You have a page, which is a wiki page, similar to your home page of your site. And you have a web part page, which is the old school back in 2007 way you could create a page before they had wiki pages. There is not a whole lot of technical differences between the page and the web part page. Both of them can be edited inside of SharePoint Designer. When you get into a publishing page, it cannot be edited in SharePoint Designer. Both of these guys, once you create them, they're based off of a template, but then they're totally separate from the template, so you can't, you can't change something on all page types later. The biggest difference between the two of them has to do with the quick launch. The wiki page comes with a quick launch. So if I create a new page here, call it wiki page, it is going to give me the quick launch preloaded on the page, and it's going to give me a rich text layout. That means I can open the page, I can immediately start typing anything that I want. I can go get my markup styles, I can do all of those other things. I can insert content directly on the page. If I want to change the layout of the page, like for instance it comes up and it's just one big text area, I can go to the page properties. I can go to the Format Text ribbon, come over here to the text layout, and I can change the layout of the page. And then this would give me different zones and everything of where I could put the web parts, I could put different content, different things along those lines. So So I could come over here and I could build out the page however I wanted to build out the page. But the thing that I wanted you guys to see was that this gives me the quick launch bar. Okay, so the quick launch bar is there. If I came over here to Site Actions and I said More Options, I'm going to search on Page again, and this time I pick a web part page and I hit Create, notice that I get a completely different layout. I get to choose how I want it to be laid out. Okay, and then I have to say what library does it get created in. When I click Create here, it's going to create a page for me, but notice I have no quick launch and I have no rich text areas. They're basically the same thing. If I want to put rich text on here, I just have to put it inside of a content editor web part. So it's two different ways to give you real estate, both called pages, but they behave differently. If you go out and do a little bit of research on the web part page versus the wiki page, I'm not quite sure why anyone would really go out and do any research on this, but there's like a following in the SharePoint community, and there are those of us that love one page over another, and so they'll come in and try to tell you why you should use this page over another. And try as I may, I really don't have any good technical reasons of why you'd use one over the other, and I almost always, I'd probably say 99.9% of the time, makes the decision on do I want the quick launch there or don't I? And I only want the quick launch there if it's going to help them navigate to something to drill down. Most of the time, if it's a dashboard sense and I'm trying to present a view of data, I usually don't want the quick launch because they can always get back to the quick launch by going to the home page. So most of the time, I just end up using a web part page. Have any of you guys used any of the wiki pages and run into issues where all of a sudden your web parts start disappearing off of your pages and things just disappear? So the one warning I would give you about the web part pages, or I'm sorry, about the wiki pages, is that whenever you're using a wiki page, the most important thing you can do is save. So save all of the time and save often. If you add a web part to a wiki page and you try to change the web part properties before you have saved the web part on the page, it will get confused because it's trying to save a reference to something that doesn't have a reference. And so to keep your page from blowing up, it will just make it disappear. And then you're sitting there with, well, where the heck did my web part go? And then you try to put it back and you can't. So that's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't like the wiki page. It's because you just have to save all the time when you're using it. Do you have a question?
Last week I was just playing around with this trying to work out what the different pages were, and I saw the quick launch disappeared, and then I found that this editing designer had removed about 3 lines of code and add one.
Yes, yes. So you can do things like that inside of SharePoint Designer, but remember, like, I have these blinders on, and if it requires semicolons, and so when he says remove 3 lines of code, I don't usually tell people they can do that, but they can. So you could put the quick launch back on there. There's also ways that you can add some content editor web parts on the wiki pages that as soon as it loads, it will hide the quick launch. So there are some ways around it, but you can do that. There really is no difference with the pages. I'm glad they kind of left it alone. I just wish they would have named them different things. Like, don't have 3 things all called pages that behave totally different. Like, to me, that doesn't make sense. But Microsoft didn't ask me when they were doing this. No one said, hey, Jen Mason, what do you think? Probably because they know I'd tell them. So we have these here. Whenever I'm using a page like this, I just have to use a lot more content editor web parts to get those styling elements there. But as soon as I have a content editor web part, I have all the same functionality that I have on the rich text field inside of the wiki page. So really no right or wrong reason for those, it's just preference. What I will say though is once you build out a solution, I would try to make all the pages inside of that solution all match the same layout. So if you're using a web part page and you have additional pages, use web part pages. Make it as easy visually for your users as you can, unless there's a specific need to do one or the other. I try to be very consistent with that one. Okay. Once we create the pages, we're going to put web parts on them. So we have list web parts that are going to display something, and we have functional web parts that are going to do something. what I find most people when they start with SharePoint is that they create lists, they put web parts on pages, they don't hardly ever do anything beyond grouping and sorting. And so I'll create a list, I'll have a view that groups something and sorts something, and that is all that I do with my data. Okay. I love that, but there's so much more you can do with just a simple list. So what I want to take a few minutes and do is go through one of our lists. We're actually going to go down to one of our basic lists. And I just want to show you some of the things that are available just when we go in and mess with views. Okay, so we have a view here, and I'm going to go to the list, and I'm going to say modify the view. Okay, these are all the things that people are really familiar with. What columns do I want to display? What order? How do I want to sort it? But there's a couple of things that I bet you guys don't usually do. How many of you guys use inline editing? Ooh, I'm going to get some oohs and ahs, I think. Okay, inline editing, once that is selected, I'm going to go ahead and say yes to inline editing and say OK. Now when I go to my list, notice what's gone. The thing on the bottom that says add new item is gone, but I have this nice little green check mark. And when I click that, it's going to open up and let me actually add new items in line. This is similar to the datasheet view, except for this actually works with all of the field types. So I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the datasheet view does not work with many different field types, and it just doesn't display, and then people are confused, and you have to turn off datasheet view. Well, in 2013, they fixed that. In 2013, datasheet view completely goes away, and it's now referred to as what they call the quick edit, which is always just on and always just works. It really makes me happy. So they did that. But in addition to being able to add these new items, check out that as I scroll over these, I can click on it and people can make changes. Well, what do we know about different views is that we can select them inside of web parts. So imagine that I have data and I want to give users a context and I want to drive them to action. So if we have a task dashboard and we're showing all of the tasks, and we want to have a web part over here that says my outstanding tasks, and they can edit it directly in line without ever having to leave the page, we're giving them a bunch of information and driving them to action directly on the page using all out-of-the-box tools.
How does validation work?
Validation is going to work the same way validation works on the list. So it'll pop up and tell them, or it will give them a red squiggly line, different things like that. Yep, it's going to work exactly the same. So if I had different values here that I wanted to show people, and I have got some other completed dashboards in my VM here. I'm going to come back, show view full screen. Okay. And these are some different dashboard examples that I have, but this is a task dashboard. And so this is where I was showing all of these tasks, but this is a list that's got that piece there, and people can directly from the list with all of their tasks open it and update the fields. But because it's just a SharePoint list, I can pick what fields do I actually want them to update in this view. But I can drive people to action directly from the page so that they don't even ever have to leave the page. And so that is one of the most underused features. Have you guys noticed how many times I wish I was like paying everyone $1 every time today I said this is one of the most underused features in SharePoint? Because I just keep saying they're all the most underused feature in SharePoint. Bad habit of mine. I also do the same thing with my favorite feature. It just happens to be whatever feature I'm talking about, I'll call my favorite. They're all my favorite. Okay. So this is inline editing. You guys like this one? People usually like this one and never use it. So this is another one that people really like. The other one I want to show you is the one that is on by default that can drive some people nuts, drives me nuts, and that's called the tabular view. The tabular view is what allows us to select multiple items. That is on by default, and you've probably run into it before. That's this guy, where you can select multiple items. Only some list it makes sense to select multiple items, but this is on by default in every view that you create. But it's not necessarily intuitive, at least I don't think so. Excuse me. It's not necessarily intuitive that that would be called the tabular view. So most people don't realize, well, how do I turn this off? So that is in your list settings. You can modify the view, and that is a column that can be just unchecked. And if I take away the tabular view, then it's no longer going to give me that multiple list selection. Okay? So that makes things a lot easier if I don't intend them to select multiple items. So really, document libraries, sometimes I like them to select multiple items so they can check in and check out multiple items at once. For other things, I don't necessarily like to let them do that. So anywhere that it's going to confuse people, I like to turn off that tabular entry. Okay. Some of the other things that we can do besides that is we can come over here and do the group by. I'm sure you guys have already done that one, so I'm going to kind of skip over that one pretty fast. You can also do totals. And so this would give you different counts for the values in your list and the items in your view based on the different things that you're doing. The types of columns that you have are going to give you the mathematical functions that you can do. So if I had a date column, it might let me do like an average. If I had a number, it's going to let me do average, min, max. So the functions that I can do are going to be dependent upon the column type. And then these are going to show up at the top of the list. Okay? Styles. This is the part where it gets a little bit cool. So we see that we have different styles here. There's actually a couple of these different ones that I want to show you guys. Newsletter being one of them. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click on newsletter style and I'm going to say OK. And notice what it does to my list. It actually puts them there, it shades them, and then it gives them that horizontal line between all of them. Where this becomes very powerful is if I had a column in here that was of type multiple lines of text. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I am going to put in multiple lines of text. Come in here, and I'm going to say OK. Okay. Now I'm going to come into one of my items, and I'm going to go to the drop down, and I'm going to say Edit the item. I'm going to add a bunch of text and say Save. Notice where it put the values. So it's going to recognize the type of text that I have and then store it in the order that makes the most sense. So let's say I was over here and instead of doing the multiple lines, I wanted to put it all together. Those different things. It's going to save it out like that. Okay? What's awesome about this view is that this view has smarts in it that other views do not have. So let's say I put that text first. It's now going to display the text across the top and then give me the rest of my columns below it underneath it, because visually that would be what makes the most sense to the users. So it's going to rearrange how the fields are displayed based on the field types and the order that they're in. So this is actually pretty cool when you've got, I don't know if any of you guys have users like mine where they think they need like 82 columns of data and they think they need to look at all 82 columns of data at one time, but then they get upset with me that they have to scroll. And it's like, well, you want to look at more data than you can ever actually look at, and now you're upset that you have to scroll. Okay, can we look at less columns? No, we need all 86. Okay, this could be a solution for that, because then it's going to put it in a format without them having to do the scrolling. So newsletter is probably the style that I use absolutely the most, because it visually does things for me that make it easy for me that I don't have to do any additional work, but it works with the data that's there and looks pleasing to the eye. So I do a lot with the newsletter style to keep things going that way. There's also the newsletter with no lines. So you can kind of pick between if you want that horizontal line or not. Okay. The other thing that you can go look at is what they call boxed. In a document library, they call this details. But boxed is going to put all of the items together in a nice little box. Okay. When I'm looking at 7 or 8 items like this, this is not a very powerful view. But what you can also do, and this is one thing I really like to do on documents, is you can come over here and we can say, well, let's sort this by the most recently modified document on top. So we'll put the one that's been most recently modified on the top. And then we'll come over here to our item limit, and we'll say only show me one. And we're going to limit the ones returned. What this is going to do is just show me the most recently modified items. So imagine that I had a document dashboard, and I was maybe showing all of the items, but on the home page up at the top, I had show me the details about the most recently modified document. Every time they refresh that page, it would show whichever one had been most recently refreshed. So if I'm a team working on documents and I want to talk about context, I want to give people data and then give them context, I can give them more details about the most recently modified items, and in this nice little block view it looks nice. And then when you put the web part on the page, it's going to resize itself to show up based on the limitations of the space that it has. So it ends up giving you a really nice look and feel to the data without you having to do a lot for it. Okay. One other view that I like to look at is what's called the preview pane. I'm going to come back up here and set my item limits higher. Oops. Go back into style, and I'm going to go to preview pane. Come down here, and I'm going to say OK. This one puts all of our list items in one column and then gives me the ability to hover over them, and it will display all of the values that are there. So if I have a lot of information that I want to show, but I don't want people to have to click a lot, as much as people like images, they also don't ever want to click. So they want to click as little as they can and get the most data that they can. So I'll use this preview pane so that they can kind of scroll over, get what they need, and then if they needed to click on it, they could click and open it, but otherwise they can just get the data about what they need. This is a good one to use when you have maybe a list of classes or something like that where people want to just kind of scroll over and get little pieces of information. This is great for a contacts list as well, so people can see the name of the person, scroll over it, find out the information of how to contact them. So this is another preview pane. It's a list view that we use a lot. And every time you create a new list view, you can then use that in a web part. And so that's kind of the correlation between those different views. You can also, without having, I'm going to go back and open up the web part page that we created before Site Assets. Okay, we can come over here and edit this page. When we add a web part here, I don't necessarily have to have the view already created. So I can come over here and let's say we're looking at the process filters. I can add that to the page, and it's going to add the default view for me. So if I just stop editing, it's going to go there. This is what it would look like on the page. So as you're building things out, you can put a filter there, tell them what to do with it. You can put all of these different things here. That definitely looks different. If you haven't done a lot with views, this is definitely a different experience than the columns across the top. And so what we're trying to do with users is give them data plus context and doing all of those different things. And so by taking these different views, we can lay out the same types of data in different ways so that they can best interact with it. And the secret to doing this correctly is you have to understand two things. You have to understand your user and the data. And three things, what they're doing with the data. So you really have to understand these pieces, and then you can use these simple techniques to put them together to build these powerful solutions. Most people that I talk to when I'm trying to help them realize, okay, what's our SharePoint solution? Why aren't people using it? And all of these adoption things. Most of the adoption issues can be fixed by small tweaks made to just the simple solution. And so there's a lot of things that we can do just visually that can help people really get more out of SharePoint. If I want to change this view while I'm here, I can just say edit the web part. And now I can come over, edit the web part, and go to my properties. And if I wanted to, I could say, oh, well, let's edit this view even more. And then I could go down, add, maybe I want to add a boatload more fields, whatever I want to do here. Come down here and pick my style of newsletter. Okay. Just come over here and say OK. Now I see that it looks different on the page again. Okay, so I've got those different pieces of information. Now again, this is taking up a lot of space for this page because there's nothing else on it. So again, it's figuring out where I want to display the data, how I want to display it, and where is it going to fit best on the page. What you should notice is that the page is realigning itself and adjusting itself so that it fits correctly on the page. As I add more web parts here, it's going to space them for me, trying to get me to the optimal of not having to scroll left or right to get to my data, because most people don't. If it's below the fold or too far over, they won't see it at all. So we can continue to add web parts, and like I said, we have got the functional web parts and we have the filter or the list and library web parts. So we have these list or library web parts, and we have all of these functional web parts. You could take days if you were to go through and look at all of the functional web parts that you have. These different ones that we have, we can do content roll up, we can do things with filters, we can do all sorts of things to keep things going, and these are all things that are done with the context of getting users to the page and then telling them something about their data. So I'm going to hop back over here quick to the VM to show you guys a couple of completed dashboards. So we have this one task dashboard that's going to show all of the different tasks that are in progress and then a calendar of the tasks. We also have a project dashboard that when I go to this dashboard, it's going to let me select a user, and when I click on it, it's going to show me, it's letting me select a project, and then for each project, it's going to show me project details, who is the PM, all of the tasks associated with it, all of the discussions associated with it, and all of the shared documents. My resolution is really jacked up right now. But you guys can kind of see, like, this is the concept of what we're trying to get around. So instead of sending people to a list to have to look up what are my values here, it's about bringing all of the data together for the users so that they can work with it. So in our example, we have this approval dashboard. We're trying to bring the data together for users to work with it. So we have the Visio diagram that shows the process. We have the specific expense items that are in the different stages of the process. And we have additional information and links because we want to help them along the way. So if I'm in a new request, there might be certain things that I want to open, and I might click and do that. It's going to open it and let me fill out a new expense report. I'm opening it in a new window because it's a help that I want them to be able to get to. If I want to look over here and say, oh, well, what are my things? I just have a sample link that's there. I can come over here and click on rejected expenses. It's going to show me all the ones, if any had been rejected. In progress is going to show me all of the ones, if there were any that were in progress. So some of these I don't have any in the list of that kind right now. New request is going to show me the new ones that are there. So the idea is that I'm using these different web parts and I'm picking out what goes on the page and displaying it so that people can go get the data. Okay? This is done through, again, the whole concept of data connections and lookup columns. So in the PowerPoint, I have a simple 6 steps to creating these dashboards. First one is creating a list. The second part is creating the list associations. If I want similar data to be displayed together, I have to link it together somehow. So in my case, everything is linked together through this status list. So all of my different lists have a column that's of lookup type to the list that's the primary association. So in my case, I have a list of status entries. For my additional links, I look up to that column. For my documents and my expense reports, I can look up to that column. I then go through and create whatever custom views I want to have that I'm going to use on different pages. I then go create the pages. I add the web parts to the page, and then I configure the web part connections. And see, these are the same 6 steps that I basically just keep doing over and over again to build out that dashboard experience for the users. So I usually start out by creating a mock-up. I spend so much more time doing mock-ups than I actually spend building it because people don't know what they want to know until they know what they don't want to know. So usually when we build it for them the first time and they're like, it's not really what I meant. So by going in and building up these mock-ups, I can say, okay, how could you interact with this data that's on the site? How could you do these different things? And they're going to be able to see then on the pages where they can lay out all of the data and map out the different things that they could be doing. Okay. So we have the connected web parts, which is this guy again. And so when we come over here and the page is in edit mode, what we see is there's usually a primary web part on the page that's sending the data to all of the other pages. So we're going to come over here to connections, we're going to send shape data to, and then we're going to have our other lists that are there. And so what that's going to allow us to do is use one item on the page that's going to trigger web part connections to all of the other elements on the page. How many of you guys use web part connections? Do you guys like them quite a bit? Do you guys do a lot with views? Views are interesting because you can do different things with views, and then if you can't get what you want with a view, you can use SharePoint Designer to do data view web parts, which gives you a few more elements for control.
Well, I've got a big problem with large lists. Trying to get some information filtered to.
Yes. Large lists are tricky. Have you set up filtered indexes on the list?
This list is like the one I'm thinking that's inherited. It's basically a surname, a first name, and a sort of number. That's the three things that are on the list.
Okay.
But there's no other things you can filter on, so it's just a big list. So they look for the name or a membership number.
Got it.
And yeah, I'm not sure how I could get over this 5 minutes.
So it's interesting with that one inside of a list. Let me go show you one of these lists. In the list settings, if I were you, I would come over here to list settings, and I would come over here to, which one do we want to look at? I don't have any columns indexed. There would be a column here. If any of my columns were indexed, there would be another column here that said index columns. Okay. And so what you want to make sure that in your large list you have some index columns, because a list with index columns behaves differently than a list that doesn't have it, and it changes the filtering, whether the filtering happens before or after. So whenever you're working with a large list, you want to make sure that you're using the indexing on some of the fields.
You still get this message up saying it's over 5,000.
If you have the columns indexing, instead of getting the message that says it's over 5,000, it will pull back a certain number of them and let you do paging on the list. But if indexing isn't there, it's going to give you the message and say too many items.
Yeah. It's just because it's an old list. The problem being that they want to be able to filter, let's say, on a surname or a membership number, the whole list at once. So they need to have all that data there when they type it in, so the pages.
Yeah, so another thing that I've done with different things like that, especially because it's a name thing, is I go in and I use a calculated column to create and trim it so it just gives me the first letter of the last name, so whether it's A, B, C, or D, and instead of letting them filter, I let them first go, okay, click, do you want this, and then that does a connected web part to just return the A's, and then I can filter based off of that. So I've done some different things. Like that, but your trick with large list is really going to be about indexing, because those indexing columns change the way that it behaves. So that would be the thing that I would check with that. Yeah, some different things like that. So some of these other, different things that you can use, you're going to always run into issues with large list. SharePoint just doesn't like large list. It's like every version it likes larger list. So, it gets better with every version. But I do find people want so much more data than they can actually work with. It's like, well, I need to be able to find anything at any point in time, so I need to get all of the names. Well, you probably don't need all of the names. If you at least know a first or last name or a letter or something like that, there's probably a way that we can get to it. What you're probably telling me is you can't easily find what you need, so you think you need all of it, so you have more control to search over it. And so it's really trying to drill down and figure out what is that little thing that they're saying, because they're telling me they want one thing when they really just want to be able to find the data easier. So there's a lot that I do with users around that to try to do that. And a lot of these I'll create. So in that case, the one that I did with that, I created a page and just said, you know, starts with and left a blank. And they would enter in an A and hit starts with and then hit go. And it would then filter the rest of the list. And then they could use the list filters to find exactly what they were looking for. There's a couple of different ways to do that. Let's see. We have about 6 minutes left. Any other specific questions? Some of you guys are troopers. You guys have stuck with me the whole day. We're doing a book signing for my SharePoint books. I don't know if it's my 2013 book or my 2010 book at the Rackspace booth later this week. So you guys should stop by and get the book. It's for anyone who drops by, but you guys are special people. So you guys are in here, and you guys can drop by and tell them that Jen said you're special, which means you should get a book, and they can make sure you get the book because you guys stuck with me all day. It's a reward, yes. And I'll be there too, so I can make sure. Well, as soon as I find the books, I can make sure y'all get one. So you guys find me, I'll make sure you guys get one. A lot of things I do otherwise with the site are if you have any questions, different things like that, I try to put things directly on the page. So here I have a link to contact the help desk so they can click on it, and it's actually a mail to link, so you can see it's actually doing a mail to there. So it will click, it will open there. I also do a lot of things with help. I do a lot of inline help where I'll have maybe just a library on the page called help pages, and then when they're stuck somewhere, they can always click that and go find out little pieces of information. I do a lot with Snagit so that if they need to do something and I have help on the page, I'll then have big red arrows that say click here and do this and do different things like that. And I try to incorporate that just naturally in the page because I find that the more they can get proactive help, the better they are to come at it and just try to do things. And in most cases, if I can just get them to try to do things with SharePoint, they're going to figure it out very quickly, and then they're going to keep trying to do things. But if they look at it and feel like they can't work with it right away, they're really going to struggle with it. So I spend a great deal of time going back to the very basics of just making sure that the content on the page is linking to certain things and showing things up in a certain format and trying to hear, I've done a lot with the newsletter style to give it just a better look and feel so visually they can get to it. Here's just some common links where I've decided to use links directly on the page instead of a links list because of the extra functionality I get with it. So I don't know if you guys have felt this way in SharePoint, but there's like a million ways to do the same thing, and none of them necessarily are right and wrong. They're all just different. And so some of these, there really is no right or wrong way to do it. It's just different. And the key to picking the right one is really understanding your user so that you understand which is the best way to do it. So unless you guys have any questions, that kind of wraps us up. We kind of spent the whole day together.